Hi everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my October wrap-up. So October was a bit of a strange reading month for me. As I've mentioned many times, I was in an awful reading slump in September and I was still kind of feeling the effects of that throughout October. I was very much on the tail end of it, and although I am coming out of it, it's still not perfect. I'm still kind of having to make myself read and work through that so I don't fall straight back in. And so the reading in October was a bit weird. I did read quite a lot and I'm quite happy with the amount I got through, but I just wish I'd read a bit more consistently. So for anyone who doesn't know, towards the beginning of the month, I did a challenge of trying to read 7 books in 7 days, and I have a whole video documenting that if you want to check it out. And I didn't do too badly for it and felt so motivated at the end of it. I was like, I've got my confidence back. I know I can read for a long time at once. I know I can read lots if I put my mind to it. That was all great. And then I just didn't really read at all for 2 weeks, and I'm sure some people say that I burnt myself out, but genuinely I don't feel like I did. I felt so motivated and ready to read at the end of that week, having already done it for 7 days in a row. It just, I think, was a combination of the books I tried to read combined with being a bit tired and lots of other life stuff that it just didn't work out that I kept reading. And so yeah, my reading kind of slammed to a halt, but I ended up doing okay and I'm not too mad, and I feel like I'm ready to do well in November. But we may as well start off, as we always do, with some statistics before getting into the books that I'm going to be talking about that I read this month. So starting off the stats like always, I will tell you how many books I read, and in total I did read 11 books in October, which brings my progress for the year up to 96 out of 100. So I am so close to passing that 100 book mark. I should get there really soon. It should be fine to do it by the end of the year unless something seriously goes wrong. And I'm really happy with 11 books. I always try to get into the double digits, so anything past 10 is a success for me. Obviously I would have liked to read more. I had like 16, 18 books I wanted to read, but 11 will do. And then across those 11 books, it equated to 3,687 pages, which works out as 119 per day, which I'm really happy with because I try and read 100 pages a day on average. Yes, this month it was really sporadic. I had many days reading over 400 and many days not reading at all, but I still managed to get my average up, so I'm not too mad at that. I would have liked it to be more consistent, but I can't really complain because overall I got through quite a lot by hook or by crook. And then that works out as an average page length of book at 335 pages, which is almost exactly what it always is. It always ends up between 300 and 350. I did think it could be longer this month because I read quite a lot of books that were over 400 pages, but then I read 2 books that were under 200, so I'm not at all surprised that it ended up quite middle ground. So then some stats about the actual books I read, the first being the intended audience of the books. I read 10 books aimed at adults and 1 aimed at YA, which is more adult than normal to say the least. Normally I read maybe 50-50 with a slight sway towards adult, but because I read a ton of adult romance books, all of a sudden this went all the way up to adult with only 1 YA peeking in at the bottom there. In terms of genre, I read 4 fantasy books and 7 contemporary books. Again, normally I read more fantasy, but this month was more contemporary due to the 7 romance books I read for that reading week. So yeah, definitely a bit of a sway, and I could break it further into like paranormal and thrillers and stuff like that, but I would end up with so many different categories it'd be ridiculous. So I kind of try and keep it quite rough with just fantasy and contemporary and a couple others if necessary. But yeah, lots of contemporary, which is rare for me, but probably a good thing when I'm feeling slumpy. And then star rating is unfortunately where it goes downhill a little bit. I normally have a couple of 5 stars every month and then quite a few 4 stars. And I never really have many 2-star books, that's not very common, so this month is definitely a bit different to that. I did have 6 4-star books, which is great. I had 3 3-star books and then 2 2-star books. So it's not awful at all, but it is definitely lower than my norm, which is a shame. I would have liked it to be higher, but you know, and it's a shame for me that I haven't had a 5-star book all month. That's rare for me. I did have a few 4.5s, but nothing quite made it to a 5-star for me. But yes, with the stats out the way, we're going to get into what the books were and what I thought of them. As always, I'm going to go through them in the order that I normally talk about books, and if you want to look at a specific one, they are all listed in the description and chaptered throughout this video if you just want to see my thoughts on a certain one. I will say for the first 7 books, I'm going to go through them really quite quickly because those are the 7 that I read in my 7 books in 7 days challenge. So if you want more in-depth thoughts on those, I do have a wrap-up at the end of that video. Again, it is chaptered, so you can just skip to the wrap-up of that video. So feel free to check that out if you want to know more, but if you haven't already seen that or you just want to watch this video, I will go through them, but probably quite quickly. Also because I did read them almost a whole month ago now and my brain only has so much capacity, and with a lot going on recently, the details of these books are not something that has made it into my brain particularly well, so I will do my best to sum up my thoughts, but let me off a bit because my memory's lacking. So starting off, the first book I read was Meet Cute Club by Jack Harbon. This is a really cute LGBT adult romance, and it follows a guy who works in a bookstore and another guy who runs a romance book club. And when he's buying loads of books for this book club, the clerk absolutely judges him and is kind of mean about it. And then the clerk joins the book club and they work together to try and save it. And it's an adorable kind of hate to love, but more than anything, just a cute romance. It's so sweet. I love that it's LGBT, male, obviously, that's great. But I especially loved that the main character really developed. But I really loved that the bookshop clerk character developed so much throughout this book. He went from having these like preconceived notions about romance books and what they mean and how they kind of should be looked down upon, to really understanding it and realizing that maybe he shouldn't judge things straight out like that, which was really lovely to see. I love when someone grows that much throughout a book, and it was added to even more when we learned his backstory and why he possibly acted the way he did in kind of quite a judgmental way. Just generally a really sweet book. I don't remember too much of the detail of this. It is only actually very short, so there's not that much to remember, but I had a really good time reading this. I really enjoyed it. I loved all the characters. And just, yeah, it was a really, really fun one, but I do know this gets some quite mixed reviews. Quite a lot of people do not like it as much. So I would recommend maybe going on Goodreads to look at other reviews if you're interested in this one, because it's not a book for everyone, it seems, even though I quite enjoyed it, but I do kind of seem to be the odd one out with that. And this I gave a 4 star, so really good, but not an absolute new favourite. Next, I read Xeni by Rebekah Weatherspoon. I gave this a 4.5 star. I loved this so much. This is one of the sweetest and steamiest books I've ever read. I love it so much. And this is again LGBT. Both of our main characters are bi in a male-female pairing, which I love to see. And this is kind of a crazy story. It follows a woman whose aunt dies and she discovers that her aunt has left her a lot of money and estate and all sorts of things, but there is a condition that she has to marry a man that her aunt has picked out to be able to access this money. And it is so fun. I love both the main characters. Xeni is really sort of kick-ass and really, really amazing and powerful and strong in herself and knows what she wants and knows how to get what she wants. And then Mason is the ultimate himbo. He is sweet, he is soft, he's Scottish, which I don't know why I found so much fun, but I did. And you just fall in love with him the second he's on the page. He's so loving and caring even before they're in any form of relationship. So he was really great to read about. And there's lots of other side characters who are also really, really great. So just overall a brilliant cast. But I think my favorite thing about this was the relationship between Xeni and Mason, even outside of the romance. So right at the beginning of this book, they're both thrown into this crazy situation where they're marrying someone for convenience who they don't know, who they don't really want to marry, but it's a worthwhile thing to do. But what I really liked is that they noticed quite early on that the only other person who can empathize with what they're going through is the other person in that situation. And so they get a really kind of good relationship going, checking in on each other and checking how the other person is doing, just in a friendly way at the beginning. But that happens really, really early on, and I loved that aspect of this book, so I'm really glad that was included in it. And then obviously it does develop into a really cute romance, etc, etc. So that was really great overall, but as I said, I really especially loved that really early on you got this strong connection between them, just out of almost mutual respect and having a shared experience and using that to connect to each other. So that was really, really great, and I'd highly recommend this. I'm going to be looking up the author. This is actually part of a companion series, so I'm going to be reading the other books in that series. Big love for this book for certain. Next was a slightly more disappointing book, and that was Well Met by Jen DeLuca. I didn't dislike this book. It was a 3 star, I think, for me, but it came so highly recommended. This was recommended to me so many times by so many people. I've seen so many people love this book that I really thought it'd be one I loved, and it kind of wasn't. It fell a bit flat for me. This is a kind of fake dating, kind of hate to love situation, following a woman who has to return to her hometown to help out her sister after her sister is in a car accident, as the sister needs help taking care of her child and things like that. And by all sorts of circumstances, our main character ends up taking part in a Renaissance fair, and when she's there, she kind of doesn't get on with the leader and the person who's running it, but then the two of them end up in a fake dating situation as their characters in the fair, and it's all a bit ridiculous. But what frustrated me is, in a hate to love, I feel like there needs to be some form of reason for the tension, even if the reason later turns out to be not real or whatever. You kind of have to have a reason. These guys just hate each other for no reason, and if they had just sat down and had a 2-minute conversation of, I think you're being mean to me unnecessarily, and what the other one had gone, oh really sorry, that's not the image I'm trying to put across, they could have got on fine from about page 10 of this book. But no, they argued for like more than half the book. And it just frustrated me that so much time was lost with an unbelievable tension that then didn't translate to me to any kind of romantic or sexual tension, because it was just them hating each other for no reason, and I found it frustrating. It took too long for me to care about them together to actually get invested in this book. Once they'd got that sorted, I really liked it and it got really interesting, but as I said, over half the book was less interesting to me, so definitely wasn't quite the one for me. I don't have too much else to say for this. It was a promising start, and I wouldn't say don't pick this up just because I didn't love it. As I said, it was a 3-star, it wasn't bad, but a lot of people do seem to absolutely love it, so this may well be one that you love. It may just be me who didn't quite agree with it. Next, I read The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This was another 4.5 star for me. I love this book so much. It was so good, and I especially love that this was a little bit darker and dealt with some heavier topics than a lot of romance books. I almost wouldn't call this a romance book. I think this is probably more of a rom-com, even though it's not that comedic. Well, it is in places, but it also deals with a lot of darker things, but it's not just a straight romance. There's a lot of other things going on. But to give a bit of premise, this follows a girl But to give a quick premise, this follows a woman who needs a place to stay and she needs a flat in London, and flats in London do not come cheap. So she ends up entering into an arrangement with a guy where they share the flat, so only one bedroom, one bed, they're sharing the whole space, but she gets it in the evenings and the nights and he gets it during the day because he works night shifts, so he only needs to be at home during the day. So that's the arrangement they come to, and they haven't actually met though when this arrangement is agreed. It's agreed over text and through another person. And so they start communicating via post-it notes left around the flat, and it is just so adorable. And the romance kind of happens relatively early on, and then I like that the romance was relatively sustained throughout the book. You see it develop, but it's not sort of lots of will they, won't they, which I quite enjoyed. The only aspects of tension from this book came from the main female character's previous relationship, but I thought that was done really interestingly, and there was a lot of very interesting issues handled in a really good way, at least as far as I can speak to the rep, because she was in a sort of toxic and abusive relationship beforehand, and her dealing with that and realising that, and then realising how that is influencing how she acts now and the impact it's having on her current relationship. All of that wrapped up into one, I thought was done really nicely and really interestingly. So that was a massive plus for me, and I liked that it delved into a bit more than some other romance books. The one other thing I will say is that you do get sort of alternating chapters from the male and female protagonists' perspectives, and a lot of people complain about the male protagonist's perspective because the way it's written is really quite stylistic. It's really short and sharp and choppy, and some people don't love that. I personally really liked it. It made it really easy to know whose perspective you were in. The voices were completely different, and it felt very at home with his thought process. It made sense to me. I think I liked it more than most though because it's also how I speak. If I am left by myself to write notes or to write a message without thinking about who I'm sending it to, I don't use pronouns or anything. I just kind of use really short little sentences, and half of it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to me. My brain moves at that sort of pace. And so reading it was actually great for me. I was like, this makes perfect sense. But I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't deal with it. So I really enjoyed this one. I'm considering picking up her other book, The Switch, but I don't know. I've heard it's quite different. I'm not sure it'll be what I want. If you've read it and you've also read Flatshare, please let me know down below what you thought of them in comparison to each other, and also just what you thought of The Switch. I'm very intrigued to get like more opinions on whether I should pick it up or not. So do let me know in the comments if you've read that, because I would definitely be willing and excited to read more Beth O'Leary. The next book I read was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is a phenomenal hate to love romance. This I gave 4 stars, and this follows a couple who are getting married, and on the date of their wedding, both them and everyone in the wedding party get food poisoning and get ill. So therefore the husband and wife tell the maid of honor and the best man to take their honeymoon and go, and this is actually the siblings of the wife and husband. This is sister and brother. The wife and the sister are identical twins. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but basically these two people go on a honeymoon together who are in no way together and actually hate each other. So they're shipped off to this tropical place on an all-inclusive holiday, and they hate each other, and they're staying in a room together with no one else to separate them, and they just have to learn to get along and make the most of the opportunity. And it is so sweet. I love the way the tension was created between them. I love the reasoning behind the tension, and when they worked out that maybe that reasoning wasn't as sound as they thought, it was resolved really nicely. It's all a bit harebrained and ridiculous when they're on this holiday, but it's such good fun. And then I love that even when they're back from it, there's a whole other issue going on with the person who got married and her husband, and some sort of possible cheating and affairs going on lots, but you get a really lovely sisterly relationship formation because of it, and sort of people showing that where their loyalty will lie and how important that is to them. So many things, so good, absolutely loved it. Really want to try some more Christina Lauren because I loved this so much. If you know more Christina Lauren books you think I should try, please let me know. I do own one, which I think is Hate You, Date You, maybe? I don't know, I think it's an office romance, which I'll probably give a go. but I definitely want to try some more Christina Lauren because this was so much fun. So really just strong. If you love Hate to Love, this is definitely one I would recommend checking out. Next was probably my least favorite of these books, and that was The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams, and this was like a 2, maybe a 2.5 for me. I loved the idea of this. It follows a guy who his marriage is falling apart, and so him and some of his baseball teammates form this group where they read romance novels and kind of learn what they should be doing for their wives through that, because often they're written with women in mind, and as such they can then act better. However, I don't think that was really how it was handled. It felt very manipulative. He started quoting the book to her, and I understand it was justified that he couldn't think of a way of doing it better. He just really wanted to do the right thing, and so he used the direct quotes, and it wasn't like an intentional choice, it's just what he fell into doing. But it never really felt like they were doing it so their wives were happy. It felt like they were doing it so their wives were happy so they could benefit, which I thought was a bit dodgy. And I know you can argue the case that there is never a truly selfless act, but it just felt a little bit too self-serving and a little bit too manipulative for my tastes. I don't know why, I just struggled a bit with the concept. There were moments where it was really, really cute, but there were quite a few where it felt like almost coercion, in that she wasn't actually making an informed decision about what she was doing, because the person she was consenting to and discussing anything with wasn't really who he was trying to say to be at the time. I don't know, it just felt a bit off to me. For some reason it made me a bit uncomfortable, so wasn't the one for me, but a lot of people love this, and most people do not have that issue at all. So it may just be how I read it, I may have misinterpreted, I don't know. It made me a bit uncomfortable. It wasn't one for me. And then the final book I read for the 7 books in 7 days was Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. This is another LGBT romance. It was super, super cute. It was fake dating. This follows a guy who is the son of someone who is very famous, and he's always in the limelight, and he keeps getting bad media attention. So his attempt to get better media attention is to start dating someone very upstanding, and it'll help him. So he finds a person who also kind of needs the opposite, also needs to be dating someone to look better, and they end up getting together, and it's really sweet. And I liked a lot of this. I think this is a lot darker again than a lot of romance books, and I liked it handled really well. Kind of people growing and learning and getting out of really bad habits, and realizing that sometimes you can be making bad choices repeatedly, and it's not always necessarily in your control, but it is something you can change. But even when you decide to change it, it's not an instant, right, I'm gonna be good now. It can take a long time. It's a process to unlearn a lot of things and unhealthy behaviors. So that was really interesting. I did find it a bit slow. It's very long. It's over 400 pages, which is really long for a kind of contemporary romance book, and I felt like it did drag a little bit. But the biggest thing that annoyed me, and it's kind of a spoiler, so if you don't want to know anything about this book, then maybe just skip to the next one at this point. But the main character, as I said, he unlearned lots of this unhealthy behavior, which was great. But then right at the end, the other character started exhibiting similar behaviors. And I understand that you can have some self-awareness and therefore learn to see it outside yourself quite quickly. But suddenly this main character just became like a therapist and just knew exactly what this other guy was dealing with, why he was acting that way, and how to help him. And I was like, you've only just got your shit together. It just felt a little bit too simple for him to then be able to give the perfect advice to someone going through a vaguely similar situation. I don't know. It felt like too quick a character development. We'd had this really nice slow progression of him learning about himself, and then like this switch flicked and he was the perfect person. He could help everyone else. It felt a bit off to me, but overall, a fun book. I think I gave this one a 3.5, so in no way bad, just not my favourite. But it was very British, which I give it points for, because I love British romance. I don't know why, it just makes me happy. But this is set in London, as British as anything, and I love that. But then moving on from these 7 books in 7 days, the next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a book I have been anticipating for I don't know how long. I don't know when this book was first announced, but as soon as it was first announced, I was anticipating it. And it didn't quite live up to the hype for me, which sounds ridiculous because I'm still undecided between a 4 and a 4.5 stars, but somewhere there. So I really enjoyed it. It just wasn't what I expected. I had tried so hard to avoid seeing reviews, to avoid seeing any form of synopsis other than like the one-line synopsis of it's about a girl who makes a deal with the devil that everyone forgets her, and then one day someone remembers her name. That was all I knew, and somehow I still went into it with a really strong idea of what I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't that at all, which impacted my enjoyment of it, which is completely on me. but I don't know how I managed that, having avoided hearing anything about this book for months and months and months. What this book does, I feel like, is it really shows you so many examples of the way in which she's forgotten, which for the first maybe 100 pages I thought was fascinating. There were things you would never even think of. There's one example which really stuck out to me, was she walked through a field of corn, and behind her the corn sprung back up from where she'd trodden on it because she couldn't leave a mark on the world. Nothing will remember her. And those sort of things, those details that V. Schwab picked out, I thought were phenomenal. That's the sort of thing that really made you feel for this character and realise quite how big a thing this was. And that was lovely. But I felt like after 300 pages, we'd seen enough of that. There were more and more examples repeated, and a lot of the examples got very similar, so you kind of knew what was coming and they weren't as impactful to me. And although I love detail, I love world building, I felt like we were recounting so many different examples of Addie's past that I actually kind of lost the impact of them because I got a bit bored and I wanted just a tiny bit more plot in the present. I'm not saying every book has to have a big plot. It could literally just be a character study, but because I was expecting at least some plot because of the way the synopsis is done, that one line, if someone remembers her, that implies like, oh, exciting, something's gonna change. And I didn't really feel that, because I kind of thought that with someone remembering her, she would hope that the curse was going to break or there'd be a way out of it, or something dramatic would happen, and it wasn't that, which is fine. I would say the last 150 pages there's suddenly a plot, but this is 550 pages. The last 150 is not very much to just have plot in. And so I did enjoy it, and it was beautifully written, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I feel like opportunities were almost slightly missed in having like some form of motivation for the book. I felt like a lot of the book was just meandering. There wasn't a reason for it to keep going. So that was kind of why I didn't love it as much as I hoped. But I will say I have since listened to V. Schwab talk about this book in a sort of online tour stop, and it gave me a lot of insight into more of sort of Addie taking her own agency and how cleverly she manipulated this to her advantage and all sorts of different things. So this is definitely a book I'm going to be rereading in the future with all of that in mind, and also without my preconceived notion for plot, because I feel like I will enjoy this more if I'm not sitting waiting for something to happen that won't, if I just enjoy it for what it is. So this will be reread and hopefully liked more, but for now it's like a 4 or a 4.5, which is in no way bad. Just I thought this would be a 5-star new favourite book, no questions asked. And it wasn't quite. The next book I read was the first of the spooky books I planned to read this month. I didn't read as many as I wanted, but I did read a couple, and that was The Monster of ELendhave by Jennifer Giesbrecht. I gave this 2 stars. Maybe a 2.5, but within that 2 range for sure. I didn't love this. The first 10, maybe even 15 pages were phenomenal. I was on the edge of my seat. I remember I was actually on a train when reading it, and I felt like shivers down my spine. I felt so uncomfortable. Like I remember consciously realizing I wasn't breathing and my eyes were so wide. And I was like, this is so atmospheric. Oh my God, it's so like just the vibe of it just really got me. And then it got really, really dull. Literally after those first 10 pages, it got so dull and I was so disappointed. This follows a creature who calls himself a monster, who seems to have kind of come from nowhere, but he can manipulate people and he kills lots of people to get what he wants. And then he comes across this magician who, you know, notices him, and then they kind of start working together, but this magician is kind of in control of the whole town politically. And I'm not sure how much I followed this. I feel like normally novellas, because this is really short, under 200 pages, normally novellas, you don't have that much world building, but it still makes sense. This just felt like I'd missed a whole chunk, but also I would not have wanted it to be longer. But it didn't do it for me. I don't even know how to describe it. It had no vibe, not a lot was happening, I wasn't interested in it. I can't remember how this ended, and I finished this about 4 days ago. Not for me, 2 stars. Thoroughly disappointing, because I thought this would be one that I absolutely loved. Very sad. The next book I read was The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker by Lauren James. This was very kindly sent to me by Walker Books, so thank you to them for sending me this copy to review. This was another one that was kind of disappointing. I have read a couple of Lauren James books. I've read The Quiet at the End of the World, as well as her middle grade book, The Starlight Watchmaker, and I actually really enjoyed both, especially The Quiet at the End of the World. It wasn't a favourite for me, but I really liked it. So I was pretty optimistic that I liked her writing, but this didn't do it for me. This was a 3-star, so it's not bad. It just did not do it for me at all. I I don't really know how to describe it. I'll start with a synopsis. This follows Harriet, who goes to university at Warwick University, British again, love it. And she ends up dying very soon after being there in this old sort of hall of residence, which is now dilapidated and ruined and abandoned. And she wakes up as a ghost and discovers there's loads of ghosts there from different times, and they've all been there. And all sorts of mysterious goings on start happening. She's having to learn how to be a ghost and possibly acting really poorly. I spent a lot of the book quite bored. I think the most telling thing for me is I'm not good at DNFing books, not because I feel guilty or anything, but just I love knowing how they end. I absolutely have to know how they end. Even if I don't really care, I just have to know. There's that teeny tiny bit of curiosity. I put this down about 30 pages before the end of a 430 page book, and went on social media for like 3 hours and would very happily have never picked it back up to see the end. It just, for whatever reason, it didn't quite grab me. And it was well written and it was interesting. I did like the characters, tons of LGBT rep, which I loved. But the stakes never got to me. I think more than anything, and this sounds really bad, but they are all ghosts. They are all people who are dead. And basically the only stakes were their lives. And like, I know they are still sentient, but for whatever reason, I just didn't feel that drive that they had to stay alive. I don't know if it's because they were ghosts or because I just didn't get invested, because I'm reading another book now with a ghost and I'm very invested in him staying alive. So I don't know exactly what it was, but I just didn't feel the stakes in this book at any point. It was interesting, but it felt like it was trying to be this thriller, fast-paced, interesting, and it wasn't for me. So it was a bit of a letdown, unfortunately. I'm glad to have read it, and one of the characters, especially Felix, I love, but the rest I didn't. I did quite like Harriet towards the end, had a very interesting kind of, we learned more of her backstory, and that was very interesting. And I realise it explained her actions early on in the book, but for whatever reason, it didn't make me like her. I don't think I was meant to like her as such, but I feel like that explanation should have made me more understanding to what she did earlier on, and I don't know whether it was how it was handled or the way she acted earlier on, but it kind of just made me go, you were still horrible. Whereas in a lot of very similar books where people have acted poorly and then the reasons explained later, you instantly kind of just go, oh my god, I'm so sorry that happened to you, I understand. I didn't get that feeling. I think again, just the lack of investment. So 3-star, middle of the road, read it if you want to. I wouldn't force it on anyone. And then the final book I read very, very quickly at the end of the month is Saga Volume 3. I am gradually working my way through the Saga comics when I get around to buying them because they're so expensive. For anyone who doesn't know, this is a graphic novel series following 2 people from warring races on warring planets who have got married and had a child, and they are now trying to escape both of said planets. And there is so much going on outside of that as well, and it's getting more and more sort of intricate and interesting as the books are going on. I'm definitely going to try and read at least one a month for the next few months until I'm up to date, because I worry if I leave it too long I'll start forgetting the detail and losing the plot completely. I don't have much to say. This is a 4-star. All of them have been 4 stars for me so far. I love the art style. The plot is so complex and so fascinating. By far one of the best graphic novels I've read. I am loving it. I feel like the books are going to start to go up to 5s very soon as I get more and more invested. But yes, loving this, think it's brilliant, highly recommend. Everyone already knows what Saga is, but very, very good. So that is it. Those are all the books that I read. It's a pretty healthy looking stack. I'm pretty happy with that. So that's it. I think that's it for this video. So please let me know down in the comments below what you read, how your reading's going at the moment, how are you looking for November? Is that gonna go better for you, do you think? I hope it goes better for me. But that's everything, so leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. Links are down below to all the book clubs and read-alongs and all my other social medias that I'm involved with, so check those out if you want to see anything else. That is it for today, so bye, and I'll see you in the next one.